Written and staged in 1599, As You Like It has a double identity. On the one hand, it's a comedic satire of pastoral romance and perennial desires for romantic happy endings. On the other hand, Shakespeare gave his comedy a realistic edge by embedding its personal encounters in topical contexts of agricultural and environmental controversy. Director Chris Abraham's production at this year's Stratford Festival put productive pressure on this structural tension. He resituated the play in a 21st century near future of climate disruption, political tyranny, and personal exile and survival. Full disclosure, I was the dramaturge for the show, and Abraham drew on my ecocritical writing about the play. An invented dramatic prologue established a parallel early and late modern Anthropocene time frame, while also serving to introduce the overarching story of the three Du Bois brothers, Oliver, Orlando, and Roland. Set designer Julie Fox replaced the usual central balcony and descending side stairs of the festival stage with large, three-story double doors. They created an impression of forbidding monumentality, emblematic of authoritarian power now ruling over a post-collapse world. Political and social breakdowns had given a few families, such as Oliver's, opportunities to create mega-farms. Fox represented their hyper-profitability by 3 tall piles of grain sacks. Lighting designer Imogen Wilson spotlit the stacks on a darkened stage. Bent-over laborers entered through the big doors, carrying heavy sacks, and started making a new pile, harried by armed guards shouting, "Quickly, hurry up!" When one worker faltered and distracted attention, another bolted down the front stage stairs into a lower entry tunnel. A guard pursued him, and a loud gunshot was heard. Workers shuffled off stage, and Orlando, played by Christopher Allen, entered with his opening complaints about his brother's tyranny to his father's elderly servant, Adam, played by John Eng. After Oliver, Andrew Chone, falsely promised to give Orlando some of his inheritance, he secretly colluded with Duke Frederick's fearsome wrestler Charles, played by Joe Perry, to break Orlando's neck when he answers Charles's challenge the next day. Abraham staged the wrestling as a literal cage match, reminiscent of today's hyper-masculine, politically right-wing Ultimate Fighting Championships. The outdoor event in wintry temperatures with light snow falling became a performative spectacle of Frederick's regime of terror. Menacing armed guards policed public spectators as well as the polarized court audience standing around or outside the metal cage. They included Frederick's daughter Celia and Senior's daughter Rosalind, who had been allowed to stay at court to keep her cousin company. Dressed in full head coverings, they curtsied deferentially in Frederick's presence. When Orlando unexpectedly overthrew Charles, Rosalind, played by Sarah Farb, hung a chain around his neck which he carried into forest exile, accompanied by Adam, after Oliver threatens to kill them. After the enraged Duke Frederick, played by Sean Arbuckle, banishes Rosalind, Celia, played by Makambi Simamba, accompanies her into Arden. For their safety, Rosalind disguised herself as a young man and carried a rifle. She and Celia are accompanied by the court clown Touchstone, played by Steve Ross, whose dissident humor has also made him suspect of Frederick. LeBeau, played by Jeff Lillico, was less fortunate. Already a physical outsider at court because of his nervous bowing, he is suddenly shot dead by one of Frederick's oligarchs after secretly advising Orlando of the Duke's hatred. In Arden, Stratford's scenography was far different from traditional stagings conveying a summer camp atmosphere. Duchess Senior, played by Shauna McKenna, and her followers appeared in a dark winter forest setting gathered around a weak campfire with scavenged cooking utensils. Senior's original fantasy that, quote, "Here we feel not the penalty of Adam, the season's difference," unquote, was changed to "Here we feel but the penalty of Adam." That is, here we feel the harsh effects not only of a spiritually fallen world, but also of climate change worsened by human hubris. The Duchess's stoic idealism towards the icy fang and churlish chiding of the winter's wind became physical resilience in the face of unseasonable weather. This passage was one of relatively few textual substitutions in the original script. Although overall it was trimmed to a 2.5-hour running time, Abraham's reinterpretation unfolded more by way of dramaturgical invention than textual rewriting. The camp, for example, was guarded by several refugees carrying rifles, and it became a site of paramilitary resistance. Senior and Jaques have known each other in the past, and the Duchess is open-minded towards his unconventional but often contradictory opinions. In Shakespeare's play, Jaques is recognizably a fashionable malcontent of the late Elizabethan stage railing against city vanities. But Shakespeare also individualized Jaques as a modern seeker for new values and a new language to articulate them. He is open to change in worldviews. As often with subjective change in Shakespeare, this process starts through an emotional connection with otherness. For Jaques, it is his affective outpouring towards a fatally wounded deer left to die alone by hunters. When the First Lord reported Jaques' reactions, there was a bit of eyeball rolling around the camp. But Abraham's interpretation gradually clarified the significance of Jaques' encounter for Senior and her followers. By reciprocating the deer's groans, Jaques recognizes that non-human as well as human animals share fearful vulnerability to mortality. Aaron Crone later pointed the embodiment of this vulnerability in individual beings in his famous 7 Ages of Man speech. Back in Act 2, Scene 1, Jaques revalues the deer as a person, not a thing or property. Quote, "Fat and greasy citizens," unquote, have violated her intrinsic dignity and natural rights by hunting her down in her native dwelling place. Her abused personhood connects her to the forest refugees being subjected to arbitrary violence for scarcity and climate insecurity. The Stratford production clarified the trans-species intersectional injustice which unites the deer and the forest exiles. Duchess Senior's response was to practice a conspicuous politics of social inclusion and collective solidarity. With the aid of a stick, and therefore other-abled herself, McKenna charged the guitar-playing Amiens, Gabriele Antonacci, to seek out the alienated Jaques and bring him back into the group using the emotional drawing power of his music. When Jaques entered Act 2, Scene 5, whisper singing Under the Greenwood Tree, Antonacci quietly joined Jaques one line at a time until they were singing an informal duet. Then, before exiting, Jaques lightly caressed his cheek. The fleeting same-sex attraction hinted at a backstory of repressed non-normative desire and therefore of personhood in Frederick's court. And it looked forward to Jaques' rejection of the final heteronormative marriage celebrations. But keeping with his hopeful theme of inclusion, Abraham altered Shakespeare's anti-idealizing gesture. When Jaques tried to leave to seek out the converted Duke Frederick, he was stopped by Amiens, who handed him a spare guitar. Jaques joined in the music-making of the square dance and remained, at least temporarily, attached to the new community. One of the community's defining principles was articulated by Hyman, played by John Eng, formerly Adam. Quote, "There is mirth in heaven when earthly things made even atone together." Things made even made greater sense in the light of Jaques' assertion of species kinship with the wounded deer. It also recalled Corrin's environmental philosophy in his light-hearted but meaningful sparring with Touchstone in Act 3, Scene 2 about mutual animal-human care and coexistence. The weather had turned brighter and warmer. Corrin, played by Hiro Kanagawa, tended to spring flowers and beds around the stage, while Touchstone shoveled compost, although not in this image. In the final act, Abraham refocused their debate about bioequity exclusively in human political terms. When Jaques du Bois, played by Evan Mercer, the middle brother of Oliver and Orlando, made his surprise entry with news about Frederick, he drew a crown out of a knapsack, which he presented to Senior on bended knee. The entire company genuflected, leaving only Shauna McKenna standing. She tentatively took the crown in her free hand, but did not put it on. She then carried it to the side of the stage as the marriage song, "It Was a Lover and Her Lass," evolved into a hoedown, which she wasn't able to join physically. McKenna casually put down the crown and left it there. Her decentering gesture hinted at the future possibility of equitably distributed governance. But the Stratford show had also raised expectations about how the ending would suggest future environmental change. In Shakespeare's text, almost everyone is happier at the end of the play, but state and private lands, concentrated wealth, and political authority are restored very close to a patriarchal status quo ante. This was also true of the Stratford production, despite the aura of progressive change in McKenna's gendered leadership. Moreover, because most trimming cuts fell on Acts 3 and 4, implied rebuilding of ecological responsibility was not evident in the crowd-pleasing conclusion. Signs of climate change-elevated summer heat, for example, might have suggested that the new generation would have to deal with the continuing weather extremes. Overall, under-fulfilled eco-expectations raised questions about the limits of eco-dramaturgy without greater structural changes to Shakespeare's text. As You Like It signs of the early modern Anthropocene were obviously not meant to foretell solutions to the 21st century climate emergency, but this show pointed to how future, bolder eco-adaptations might further develop those connections. Thanks for listening.